Welcome everyone to DLA. David Lombardino here. Today I have the pleasure to be talking with Joel Goza. Joel has been quite a busy guy. He is a visiting scholar at the University of Houston's Graduate School of Social Work. He contributes regularly to national conferences for thought leaders and provides keynote addresses and breakout sessions at universities, as well as faith-based and nonprofit organizations. He's written a couple of books, which he'll be talking about today, along with running an online course complementing those books. He is a graduate of Wheaton College and received his Master's of Divinity from Duke University. He is currently pursuing a Master's in Executive Leadership at the LBJ School of Public Policy at the University of Texas. Joel, welcome. Is there anything that you're not doing?
There's a whole lot that I'm not doing. There's a whole lot I'm not doing, but thank you for having me with you. It's an honor to be with you, David.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've kind of touched on some of the key points, but maybe tell us a little bit about your background. What inspires you both as a person and, personally and professionally. Kind of give us a sense of who you are.
Yeah, well, I think, for me, I find myself professionally where I never imagined I would be, and that is predominantly writing at this point. And that was not my chosen path. I had worked for a number of years within church ministry. And really, my work on writing and my engagement with words was in the context of desiring to one day be a preacher. And, I was within the African American church setting for well over a decade. And so that really became really formative for me. And then, career transitions come up. And it was really my writing that gained a little bit more traction than some of my other work. And so that's where I ended up landing, at least for a season. It's going to be dovetailed with some other things here in the near future, thankfully. But I probably for the last 5 years or so, the lion's share of my time has been doing reading, writing, and various forms of research to make books happen. I have done, a number of articles and op-eds for various publications, but probably my main investment has been in writing books.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were a pastor before, and then you had this shift to writing. I assume that you were writing the articles kind of as you were a pastor, but then like shifting to writing books was something where you kind of, I guess, took the plunge, if you will.
Yeah.
What was that moment for you where you decided, I just got to go for this?
Well, that moment never happened, but unemployment did. And so, my first book came about as I was actually in a job hunt for other things, and it had wrestled with ideas that had long been on my mind. I had lived in an inner city environment beginning in 2004, and it was in 2016 that I began my transition. And even though I had spent about 16 years, or I guess at that point it was 12 years within inner city world, my background was from suburbia. And so when I found myself in the season of unemployment, it ended up being fruitful in ways that I didn't anticipate, in that it really allowed me some room and space to do some thinking about what I witnessed and the ways that I have seen the world ended up changing due to my experiences living and working in an inner city environment. And so one of the blessings of the time of writing is that it allows some what seems fallow time to be fruitful in those ways, in ways that you didn't anticipate.
And so when you kind of decided, I'm gonna write a book, did the words just start flowing immediately? What was that like for you?
Well, I have it's interesting, I think, because I think writers talk about, writer's block, finding the groove, this, that, or the other. And I don't think I've ever experienced writer's block, and I've never experienced the groove. So, I operate in that gray zone. And I think as a writer, what I do have the ability to do is to really focus. And so growing up, I had one video game for 4 years, and it was all I played, and I just kept on repeating it, repeating it. Never got the next edition. And so I have the ability to focus long term. Now, if you look at my productivity, you would say that I experience writer's block all the time, because it does take me a long time to write, and it takes me a long time to really kind of get my thoughts on a page in a way that at least works for myself and the editors that I work with. And so there are, there in writing, there is no one formula for success or failure other than quitting. It ends in failure. I know for a number of people that writing block is a very real thing, and yet then they'll find a groove and they'll be able to be very productive. Writers like myself have a little bit different experience in that we never have the exhilaration of the groove, but we were able to make just a small incremental millimeter progress one day at a time.
Yeah. So you have kind of more of a methodical process, I guess. Can you give us an idea of kind of like for writers who might just be starting out, like what recommendation would you give to them in terms of, like, do you find it useful to set a fixed schedule of when you're working on it? Like, do you schedule breaks? Like, how do you organize your time and your efforts to really be productive? Because I assume that you've got many responsibilities in your life. You can't just sit there and write all day long.
Right. Well, and again, part of this was unemployment, right? So I did have larger chunks than probably what most writers do have. But I view writing somewhat like working out, and I think writing has to be tailored for what works for the individual, And if you don't set it up in a way that is both enjoyable for yourself and productive, and what I mean productive, it can be millimeters at a time, then it's hard to continue those disciplines for a long time. So like for me, I need large blocks of time, and I need stopping points that allow me just to go walk and to clear my head. Other writers are able to do it in, like, I can't write at 5 a.m. That doesn't work for me. I can't write at midnight. I can only write when my mind is 100% there, and when I am fully focused, which the hard part was kind of giving yourself the indulgence to do what worked for you, and to not necessarily worry about a formula with it taking longer, with the radical need for self-care. And what I mean by self-care is the care that it takes to put yourself in a position where your mind is fully functioning and you're fully ready to do what you need to do. Because walking doesn't feel like work, and yet for me, if I don't go for walks intermittently, my mind is not where it needs to be. And so, like in working out, for instance, if you don't find a groove that works for you, then it's not likely that whatever health routine that you have is going to be both enjoyable for you and long lasting. And so I know a number of writers that work full time, and they do have the ability to carve out times at 5 a.m, to write for 2 hours, or at midnight to write for 2 hours. But that's not how my body operates, And so I think people can look for what works for them. For instance, if you are working full time, what does it look like, instead of doing 8 to 5, to do 8 to 6 and to do a 2-hour lunch break, working something like that into your schedule. I think all of those things can be helpful, and also kind of cutting out of your life what doesn't provide that just doesn't prove rewarding. So a lot of things that we wrestle with, a lot of things that can eat up our time are not necessarily the things that, one, have to be done, or two, that really bring us the most pleasure for the investment that you give. I mean, there's only so many times you can watch Seinfeld, but I know that I can kill hours upon hours with that type of things. And so it does take a remarkable amount of self-discipline and self-awareness to be as productive as you would like to be, and that only becomes more difficult with the more things that you have on your plate. So there becomes a little less accessories sometimes with this work.
Yeah. And so you've used this approach on writing, I guess now two books. Well, you're currently in the middle of your second book. Tell us about your first book, America's Unholy Ghost. Did you kind of find this approach that you have to writing right away, or is it something you needed to develop? And what inspired you for writing that particular book?
So I had, before writing America's Unholy Ghost, as you mentioned, and we might as well confess that we have known each other for quite a long time, and you've been looking at my work for,
Yeah.
ever since grad school. But my disciplines of writing were shaped. One, I did do grad school, and I did undergrad within a liberal arts vein that writing was a central part of my education. Two was writing op-eds. I did those, and then three was writing sermons. And so that was kind of my background as I entered into America's Unholy Ghost. And what I found with America's Unholy Ghost was that there was a process of getting in shape mentally to do the work. And what I mean by that specifically is that the hours that I can pull on a project today are different than what I could when I first started, just because my mind is more used to doing the grind and doing the work. And you will find yourself in a season when you first get rolling that your productivity might be a sweet spot of an hour and a half. But with exercise and with discipline, that sweet spot can become 3 hours, perhaps, within a day. And so, as I was navigating the job market, America's Unholy Ghost ended up gaining more traction than some of the others, and I knew I had this window of time to get it done, and so it got to a point where I could continue to look for a job and do America's Unholy Ghost, which might mean that it never got done, or I could take this window of time that I knew that I could do and really just finish it off. And so I hopped in the deep end, and it was after I had a first draft of the book that I really hopped in the deep end to really make that draft what I thought it could be.
And at some point along the way, you had your draft. You decided that you needed to, I guess, get some help with it, right? Or kind of what was your view at that point?
Yeah.
You were already like made some good progress. Kind of where did you find yourself getting stuck, and what
Yeah.
help did you see that you needed?
Well, and I think what ends up happening often in my writing process is I get to a point where I've done the best that I could do. I've made it as strong as can make it, and it's not even close to being good enough. And so that's when you have to bring in kind of the eyes and the ears of other people to look at the work and to begin opening up different doors for what can be. And so, if what you're trying to get to is a 10, I find my first couple of drafts are about a 1 to 2 range, and then you do some rewrites, you get some help from others, you get to the 3 or 4, and it is, for me, you have to present your work before it's fully ready. And what I mean by fully ready is not that I haven't given my best for it, or not that I haven't taken my time with it, but it was the best that I could do at that point. And there does reach these exhaustion points. And so what ends up happening in drafts, for instance, when you're doing a book, is that you've gotten chapter 1 as good as you can get, and you really need to shift over to chapter 2, chapter 3, even though chapter 1 is not yet strong enough. And so I had to bring in other people looking at chapter 1, opening up different doors, take my mind to other things. And then as I work on different chapters, you have these doors that start opening up throughout the book that impact the early sections that you didn't fully see. And so I had in my first book, I had a friend working with me through the first draft, and we got a first draft together, got all the way through the end, where you did, write chapter 1, work on it, write chapter 2, work on it, go back, rewrite chapter 1, rewrite chapter 2, write chapter 3, go back, rewrite all the other ones before, until we got to the final draft. And even at the final draft, I think that we would have graded it out at about a 6 to 10, 6 out of, on a scale of 1 to 10 of what it could be. But once that final draft got there is when we saw the different possibilities for reorganizing and rewriting and restructuring, to really get it to where we were comfortable with it. And so it took a long time. And and some of the mistakes that I made along the way is that as I was writing the book, I was looking for agents for it, but it always got turned down because I hadn't spent the 3 to 4 or 5 years on it then that it really needed to have before it ever went to an agency. And I got a lot of no's, and they were kind no's. And sometimes, you even get these tips on how you make it better. But if I had to do it over again, the critical mistake that I had made with America's Unholy Ghost was in putting it out to people who might work with you on a professional basis, a literary agency, a publishing house, this, that, or the other, before it had gone through not just simply the first draft, but made all the corrections after the first draft and has sat on the shelf for a little while. And so when I knew America's Unholy Ghost was not as time sensitive, I was dealing with, work that was hundreds and hundreds of years in the making, and that there wasn't pressing public policy things, moving forward on it. And I really had more time than probably what the frenzy of unemployment allowed me to really realize I had. And so I wish I was more patient with it, but that's kind of what the process was.
Yeah, but it sounds like it was I mean, overall, the writing took, like you mentioned, a few years,
Mm-hmm.
and you
Yeah, it was
had
about 18 months from beginning to end
okay,
on America's Unholy Ghost. So within about 14 months, I had a first draft. And then it took me, and I'm saying maybe 20 months. And then it took me another 6 months to really get it to where it needed to be.
yeah,
And even that is relatively a pretty quick turnaround for a book. And yet, in not understanding the profession, I was looking for an agent after I was 6 months in, when I really should not have been looking for an agent until after I was at least 18 months in.
and so your goal with the project, it sounds like, from pretty early on, was to get an agent and get it
Mm-hmm.
published. This was something that you kind of set your mind on pretty early.
Right. And I knew enough about the academic market to have pretty high confidence that I wrote at a publishable level. But what ends up happening, for those who are not familiar with the industry, is that to get into the larger houses that really get your work the larger amounts of attention, there are gatekeepers called literary agents, and they have their choice of working with whoever they want to, and it's highly competitive to get an agent. The academic market, if you're going to publishers that just take manuscripts off the street, as long as you've got quality work and there is enough of an audience, those doors are not as narrow as what getting into what's called a trade market publisher that's really consistent of about 5 big publishing houses, that really provides the more expansive platform for the work.
Okay, so what would you say is the difference for you when you got DLA's help on your book?
Well, what was able to help me with DLA is they provided copy editing services for me. And so my work with DLA wasn't as much content, but it was in making what I had to offer in a shape that it could be delivered to others without being embarrassing. And so I have the ability to write and I have the ability to do content, but you get so deeply into these projects that you lose your ability to read for grammar, read for these other things. And what you find is that when you go out and work with others, that you want to have whatever you're presenting in as tight of a structure as possible. And that's really what DLA provided for me. And so what it allowed me to do is that once I had the manuscript done and I've had edits done and this, that, or the other, is that I was able to form reading circles with various experts to really look in, to dive into the details, and to provide more feedback on what we can do structurally, content-wise, in different venues, in a way that was really beneficial. And so what I have found, even on the book that I'm working now, is that I work with a editor who is really looking predominantly at content and at structure. And what DLA does is provides the copy edits to make it everything clean. So thankfully, my next project is under an agency. And I have learned that you don't ever send anything into an agency in particular without having it professionally copy edited. No drafts go to the agent for me without having DLA look at it and make sure that every kind of jot and tittle is in place where it needs to be.
So it sounds like you've really taken a team approach to both books, that you're kind of getting different people on board to really, you're sort of the leader, but you're also really open to getting input, getting feedback, incorporating that, and really trying to seek making the best manuscript possible according to the vision you have for it. Is that right?
Right. And when and what you're trying to do, even if and I can tell kind of like my different experience with America's Unholy Ghost and with working with an agency. So with America's Unholy Ghost, when I did reading circles, I brought the experts to the table, but I also brought people from the community. I brought students. I brought activists. I brought people from different disciplines and professions together, because what you really need is you're kind of building this team, and then what you become as the writer is looking for the gifts that you lack and for the insights that you lack, and figuring out a way to bring in your different network to make the work what it could be. And you have that opportunity to really kind of act as the conductor and synthesize it into a coherent project that has your unique signature, but it brings the guest sets of the network that you're in. And so on my project now, it's a little bit different in that I'm having a team approach all the way through the very first draft of it. And so one of my editors is a subject expert, and he is a great editor. But he doesn't have necessarily the trade press background that the agency that I'm working with does. And so, he edits for a number of the leading academic houses. But by having the trade expert in, you're able to really look at the project both from kind of the academic integrity of it, and I do nonfiction work, and then the reader is able to the reader from the agency reads it from the trade house publishing a reader's perspective, to make sure that it's not just content rich, but that it's in a package that really will have the audience that it needs to have.
Yeah. And so you actually, America's Holy Ghost turned out to do pretty well by some people's standards.
Yeah, it did, and this is what, when you do a work like America's Unholy Ghost, and America's Unholy Ghost kind of brought together Enlightenment philosophy with the struggle for racial justice, the work of MLK, into a hybrid. And what a successful book within kind of like that venue looks like is, it looks like it's probably only sells of about 1,200. Thankfully, America's Unholy Ghost was able to outperform that to some extent, but not huge sales. But it got well endorsed, and it gave you the ability to have credentials to go into other spaces. And so, we're talking about this transition. It's because of America's Unholy Ghost that I'm now going to be able to go teach it to college, even though I didn't have the PhD, but because you had academics from leading institutions across America kind of endorsing the work that you do, opened up doors that I didn't anticipate. And again, the process was several years. But thankfully, because of the network of friends, by the time it went out for endorsements to your professors at Harvard or Princeton or wherever, uh, it had not just simply my ability as a writer, but also the different perspectives of the network that I was able to make to produce the book. And so by the time that America's Unholy Ghost happened, it was, at least, in my opinion and other people's opinion, it was a pretty strong work. There's problems with it, of course. But I think that it was kind of a trade press quality end result, even though it wasn't the traditional path. And so when doors close towards doing, working with a larger house, this, that, or the other, that doesn't mean that the goals of what the quality of your final product need to be should be reduced at all. It's just that there'll have to be a different process of getting there.
That's awesome. And I think that's a really great point, that you're not necessarily looking to make big bucks from this kind of book, at least from book sales, but you're creating this foundation, you're creating opportunities for you to get, these other professional opportunities. So let's shift and talk about Rebirth of a Nation. What lessons have you learned from America's Holy Ghost? You've touched on them a little bit, but what would you say
so
with Rebirth?
Rebirth of a Nation is the title of it is Rebirth of a Nation, reparations and making an anti-racist America, and so what my plan with Rebirth of a Nation was to take the number of years that it needed to have to really do it and to really get it out there. And I found myself in a very different situation, in that when the summer of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all that stuff really hit the fan, you found yourself in a moment where reparations was a hotter topic than what you had anticipated doing. And so I had ended up doing the same thing that I did before, in that I got out to the agencies way too soon to say. And I was wrestling with grad school, some other things, but I knew that I had to go. If I was going to stop grad school and put my life on hold, I couldn't do that without an agency. But what ended up happening is, because of Rebirth of a Nation, or not because of America's Unholy Ghost, I had contacts that were able to bring me into consideration for agencies that I wouldn't have been able to be considered for on America's Unholy Ghost, because I didn't have any previous track record. And so, miracles do happen in the business, and I was able to get just some absolutely wonderful agency. And what I have found is that the quality of the work has been transformed by the team that I'm working with, because they really are the best of the best. And so they can make mediocre writers pretty good. So, but it does take time. And we do the best we know what to do with in the situations that we have, and we can have some excellent plans, but they've always got to be contingent on what's going on the ground and the demands of our lives at that point.
And I think also, one thing that I really like about your particular story is that you're not trying to force your vision to go in one particular path. You're sort of looking at what doors are kind of open, and pursuing those. And one thing that I really like that you've been doing recently, you started some online classes as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was interesting. So when COVID hit, it became a Zoom world in a way that it just wasn't before. And what that allowed for us to do, for me to do, is to really think about different ways of how is it that as a writer I can start making a little bit more money off of what my expertise is, but not only make more money off my expertise, but do it in such a way that really aligns with what my mission as a writer is and the subjects that I really care about, and to be able to execute something really with integrity, without having to do a lot of glitz and glamour. And so what we ended up doing, and I'm saying we because I was working with a small team on it, at that point to really execute it, is that we started offering just a 4-week class. And what I felt that could be out there was this niche of people who want to have a very high quality experience, kind of what you would get at a graduate school environment, and yet weren't necessarily looking for a degree and weren't necessarily even looking for an entire semester long commitment, but would be willing to do like one night a month, or one night a week for a month. And so I rolled America's Unholy Ghost into a class that was 4 weeks long. And it ended up having people from across the nation join it. And I was able to offer it on a repeated basis. And that became a revenue stream that wasn't available to me before, that really helped not simply make the money, but it also starts creating these networks of people who are interested in what I write about and the issues that our nation are facing today, on race and social justice and politics and religion and that kind of thing. And it just became a really rich environment. And a lot of times, what ends up happening is, we get to you get to finishing the book, you have the book out for a year, and then things can feel pretty dead in the water, if there's not these other opportunities to keep on opening the doors and to kind of build upon the work that has gone before. And so the online world that we live in is offering writers like myself who did a book like America's Unholy Ghost, that sold south of 1 million copies, an opportunity to still nonetheless have some income from the work to keep the conversations alive, and it also allows you to kind of keep updated with what's going on in the world. And so, like, when we do the course, the book undergirds it, but it's able to move with what's moving on in the world. And so you're talking about the ideas that were in this book that was published in 2019, and what does it look like in 2020, 2021, on how things touch the ground, what's surprising, what's changing, what could you anticipate?
Yeah, it sounds really great. So what would you say if you could offer one piece of advice to somebody who might be in your position? What would you say to them?
I think what I would say to them is, just I wish I thought along longer time frames. So if you're thinking that this thing is a year, think of it in the terms of 5 years, and that's okay. And become at peace, be at peace with the process, and understand the process is a lot longer, than uh, than what you hoped for. Because as I said, I've been working at it pretty hard, for 5 years now. And I feel like only within the last 6 months did any of the work make sense, as far as the doors that I was hoping that would have opened before begin opening. And if I had opportunities to do other things, I probably would have. But stay in it for the long haul. Surround yourself with folks who have the wisdom to provide the encouragement, but the gift set to also make whatever you do a lot better than what it is right now.
Well, that sounds great. Joel, it's been an absolute pleasure being able to help you with these books, and also to hear your story, and wish you just all the success with your next steps.
Well, I appreciate it. And for those that don't know, David was probably my first editor. He did a lot of my grad papers, and I knew that I couldn't find a better editor than David. So I appreciate the work that you've had, and you invested in a lot during my transition, and so I really appreciate that. And so best of luck to you in DLA. And I would say this is that. I went into working with DLA with the highest expectations, and those expectations were always exceeded. So I do appreciate all that y'all do, and your team. So your team's even better than you, David. So
Yeah.
thank you, man.
Well, thank you again, man, and we'll be in touch again soon.
All right, sounds good, buddy.
All right. Bye bye.
Adios.